Michael Clarke, first of all, your reaction to the response from Vladimir Putin. He's looking very stern and pretty angry.
Yes, I mean he's saying this is an armed mutiny. Prigozhin is saying this is a rebellion against the army. He's holding sort of Rostov hostage, the city of Rostov, and he's saying I want Gerasimov and Shogu to talk to me. Implication is that they've got to come here and speak to me, or I'll march on Moscow. Is the rather absurd claim he's making. And Putin is going for the other line, and he's got to really. He's saying this is an armed mutiny. This is rebellion. And he can't live with it. I mean, this is making Putin choose. He's very indecisive. He's a very indecisive man. Other than launching in his act to launch the invasion in the first place, he's been indecisive ever since. And now he's got to choose, and he's got to choose his army and his forces over this rebel who he's used in the past. He's been very happy to let Prigozhin do his own thing by and large, but Prigozhin really did cross the line in the video he issued yesterday, and then in this overnight action to walk into Rostov.
When you say ridiculous, is that because you just don't think it's possible that he could get together 25,000 people to walk on Moscow, to march on Moscow? Just explain why you don't think that's a sensible suggestion.
He claims to have 25,000 troops, and that's plausible. And they are his mercenaries, not his Storm Z troops, the convicts and so on, and the people that they've just sort of picked up on the way. But he can only do it if he gets a real rebellion in the army. I mean, if he's able to make the army rebel, then the army, might actually then, as it were, have the effect of marching on or taking over significant areas of Moscow. It has happened before in Russian history, and since the end of the Cold War, that sort of thing is not completely unknown. But I don't think it's very likely in this case. It would be astonishing if it were.
Edward, come in on this. What are your thoughts on what you've seen and heard this morning and indeed overnight? Edward Lucas, can you hear me? OK, we're going to re-establish that line with Edward because I think we've got a few problems there. So, Michael, I mean, there are so many issues surrounding this, not least that this is presumably being greeted in Ukraine by President Zelensky and Ukrainian troops rubbing their hands together, because if the mercenary Wagner group are moving away from Ukraine to focus on Russia, there's an opening up there, isn't there?
Yes, I mean, any disorganization in an enemy is a good thing if you're launching an attack or if you're trying to defend yourselves. But remember that although that is the case, I mean, this has happened at a very ideal time for Kiev, and they couldn't have wished for more. And to be honest, this is what the Ukrainian leadership were always saying, somewhat to the skepticism of Western observers and to my skepticism. I'm still skeptical. They say once we start to attack, there will be an internal crisis in Russia. And that's part of the reason why we're going to launch this counteroffensive. I still think that is probably wrong, but it's one of the elements of real confidence that the authorities in Kiev actually have. And it's interesting that Prigozhin, when he went into this meeting with Rostov, in Rostov, when he went to and he humiliated Yevgrov, who's the deputy defense minister, I wrote down a very key phrase he used in the video that was issued. He said, "We've come here to end the disgrace to our country." And it's not that these guys want to end the war. They want to fight it better. That's the whole point. They say we've got to get hold of the military and we've got to fight this war in a more efficient way.
He didn't want to actually specifically in that address mention Wagner militaries and their leader. He didn't use them by name. He was clearly talking about them. It was a short address. We know that Putin likes to go on for hours and hours. This was relatively short. I mean, presumably he's rattled. But seriously, what threat is there to his leadership within Russia?
Well, yeah, you're right. It was a short speech, and he had to come out and say something, if only to prove he hadn't fled Moscow. So he had to be there to say, "Look, I'm in control of this." That reassure people and so on. So he had to do something, and usually he doesn't say very much when things have gone badly for the Russians in the war. He keeps quiet for quite a while, but he had to say something about this. And interestingly, Prigozhin has called for the Rosgvardia, the internal troops, to rebel against the military, and the Rosgvardia is a force of 400,000 internal troops. The Rosgvardia are bigger than the regular army. The regular peacetime army in Russia is less than 300,000, and the Rosgvardia are 400,000. And they are loyal to Putin in the sense that they are controlled straight to him. The command goes straight up to him. And so the attitude of Rosgvardia would be very critical to anything that happens in Moscow. But as Edward says, what may happen on the front lines in Ukraine may be a bit different if troops just become disillusioned with taking the orders that they're given, if they feel that the command is actually disintegrating. Troops on the front line always know, whatever they're told, they know if their command is in a mess. They just know it. Now, that's not to say that Putin is going to collapse. I mean, I think he'll come through this, but be very damaged if I had to guess. But undoubtedly, compared to countries with strong institutions, like most Western countries rely on their strong institutions, where everything depends upon a sort of a medieval court, which is the way the Kremlin is these days. There is no official government in the Kremlin, really. It's Putin and a group of people around him, like a Tudor monarch. When things change, they change very quickly. And I think this might be a very dramatic week ahead of us.